and welcome to another episode of Gar Borras Time Machine. Gar, this is episode 25 of Gar Borras Time Machine. Today, you and I are going to be talking all about the 50th anniversary of Deep Purple's album Machinehead, which was released on March 25th, 1972. So that's kind of the time we're talking here. Let's get started. And, you know, when the idea for this came up, you were sharing me, like me, you're a huge Deep Purple fan. So let's get right into it and share with us how Deep Purple first came on your radar.
Well, when they first came on my radar was before Machinehead.
Yeah.
And, back in the late 60s, I was, a little kid, maybe, I think I was maybe middle school, or back in those days, they used to call that junior high school.
Yeah.
Middle school age. And, living in West Covina at that time, I remember, sometimes as a kid, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and I would hear like an animal that I could never tell what it was, but it would be calling out into the night, and I would hear that sound. And, and then, of course, I go back to sleep, to really not think that much of it. But then all of a sudden, one day I'm listening to the radio, and a song called Hush.
Oh, yeah. Old Joe South tune. Yeah.
Yeah, it comes on the radio, and I had never heard the song before. And at the very, very beginning of this song, there's that sound, and it sounded so much like that sound that I used to hear
when you're sleeping
as a kid in the middle of the night. And that's what kind of got my attention. Is like, hey, that sounds like that sound, that got my attention and everything like that. And then, of course, now I'm listening to the song, and the song became a very popular song. I think on the Billboard charts, I think Hush reached number 4.
Oh, yeah.
On the Billboard charts. But now, fast forward to Machinehead, by the time Deep Purple reached the early
70s,
the early 1970s, they were a completely different band.
Oh, yeah. I mean, going back to Hush, like I said, that's an old cover they did by, the song was really written and recorded by Joe South, and Deep Purple's version has been around just as long now, and a lot of people, when they hear Hush, they say, "Oh yeah, that's a Deep Purple song," not even aware of it. It's a cover tune, but like you say, back in the early '60s, Deep Purple was a much different band. They were a lot closer to what I would call a pop band. They had the foundation of the band, which is Richie Blackmart on guitar, John Lord on keyboards, that Hammond organ, which really gave them a unique sound, and the drummer Ian Pace. But, you're right. By the time you get to Machinehead, they're much more closer to what I would consider a hard rock band. There's a little less of a pop element there, with Ian Gillan in the band and Roger Glover on the bass. So, different band at this time, and I think that had a lot to do with Machinehead doing what it did.
Well, kind of look at it in a, I don't know if this is really the right term, but like as a kind of a chronological thing.
Yeah.
When Deep Purple came out with Hush, that was about 1968.
Yeah.
And now think about this, because Hush, you described it very accurately. They were Deep Purple at that time was a radio-friendly pop band.
Yeah.
And that was their focus, which
you can understand.
To be honest with you, all bands, when they're starting, are starting with that intention to become a radio-friendly pop band. But getting back to the chronological thing, when they're doing Hush, which is a pop song. Led Zeppelin's coming out with Led Zeppelin 1.
Yeah.
And Black Sabbath is coming out with Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
And so this is the same time, 1968. So I think that over that time time period between 68 and say 70, 71, they started seeing what bands like Led Zeppelin were doing and bands like Black Sabbath were doing, and that's when they decided that they wanted to go in that direction. They no longer wanted to be a radio-friendly pop band. They wanted to be a rock band, an arena rock band.
And it's interesting.
And that was their focus, and so they had to get rid of the singer and the bass player, and in order to make the change, because obviously those two were against it, and the rest of the members of Deep Purple, from what I've read, basically understood that if they continued on the path that they were going, the band was going to disintegrate. But if they made the change, they had a
real shot, yeah,
a legitimate shot.
Yeah.
And so the rest is history, because when you read people doing their reviews and how people look at it now
50 years later, yeah,
in hindsight,
yeah.
People look at that album as one of the quintessential defining albums of that time.
And you make a very good,
or even in rock and roll history of all time.
Yeah, you make a very good point there, because it's much more than one of the best Deep Purple albums. It's just one of the greatest rock albums of all time. And I was reading that through my research on this, and it's kind of interesting that your introduction to Deep Purple, because of your age, Gar, was the original single of Hush. Years later, around 1988 or 89, when they put out a live album, they decided, okay, we're going to record a new version of Hush. We're going to have something new for fans to check out. And it was a version, obviously, with Ian Gillan doing the vocals this time. And it was, I don't know, a lot of people kind of reacted to that. It was a little different sound, but I think it's kind of cool that Ian Gillan got to kind of take a shot at doing that,
Well, the guy was a singer.
Yeah.
When you look at him at that time, he was hitting some notes that at that time would really get people's attention, because male singers weren't singing like that, and of course Robert Plant broke down that barrier.
Yeah.
But you can definitely see Ian Gillan, having that influence from Robert Plant, and just taking that ball and running with it, because there's a lot of songs in the history of Deep Purple that really showcase his ability to hit some serious notes with massive amounts of power.
Yeah.
See, the three elements for a singer is to be able to,
reach those high notes, yeah. Yeah.
Hit the note accurately, do it with power,
yeah,
and have accuracy.
And what's interesting about Deep Purple, that people did not realize back in 1972 at that time, as much as Purple fans realize it now, there was a lot of animosity between some of the band members, especially between Gillan and Blackmore. I seen an interview with John Lord a few years before he passed away. He was talking about, in the very beginning of the band, when Ian Gillan first joined, that Gillan and Blackmore were like the best of friends. He says, in fact, he goes, they had a falling out. I don't even think they even know what the falling out was over, all these years later. It just got to a point by the time Machinehead came out, there was so much friction within the band between those two guys. And yet, you always hear stories like this that, these guys in the band, they put out this great music, they hated each other, they couldn't stand being around each other, yet it made for some beautiful music.
Well, who knows?
Yeah.
The success of every iconic band is a different recipe.
Yeah.
And they're all unique recipes of their own as to how they all went about, and there is a definite legitimacy to something like that being an element to the success, even though it's a very negative element.
Yeah.
Sometimes, because you hear about a lot of iconic bands where they have members of the bands being at some serious odds, but yet some of their best work came out of those time periods.
Oh yeah, I mean,
it's kind of, I think in most cases, having that element would be detrimental.
Yeah.
But in some unique cases, it can actually, be instrumental.
Yeah, and Machinehead, I was reading, is the 5th studio album, of course, by legendary British hard rock group Deep Purple. And one thing they noticed early on was the band, if you ever got a chance to see them, or you can even go on YouTube and catch like video clips from back in the 70s. They were like the ultimate jam band. I mean, they had a reputation as a live band, and like a lot of bands from that time, I heard stories about Kiss and other bands from that time where a lot of the bands were like, you know what, for some reason we're unable to capture what we're doing live on record, and probably prior to Machinehead, probably the album a lot of fans really were really sinking their teeth into was an album called In Rock. And so by the time it comes to Machinehead, they said, okay, we got to look at what we're doing. We got to do something a little different. So one thing they did different, they said, okay, we're going to try recording in a different studio than where we recorded before. Maybe a different environment will have somewhat of an influence on the recording. And it seems to have played a small part in, what we got on Machinehead.
Well, yes, you hear about a lot of bands, from the history of rock and roll that did that wound up, isolating themselves, and doing, basically kind of creating an environment, that hopefully spawns creativity and stuff like that. And so I can definitely see, what they were going after, because, the room that they were, targeting for doing the Machinehead recording was real spacious, echoey, you know what I mean?
Almost castle-like place,
and
yeah.
so they're basically what they were really envisioning was a big sound.
Yeah, and they definitely got in on that.
And so that was what they were going after. But I think what you're kind of leading into is that whole thing about deciding where they were going to record actually turned into a whole story that has a completely different life of its own, which is the story behind Smoke on the Water.
I'll let you take that story if you want to, Gar.
Well, at that time, Frank Zappa, was, a very popular touring act.
Yeah.
And, the band Deep Purple, when they decided that they wanted to, record in a completely different environment and just, hoping, for,
more of a,
a creative influence and stuff like that, they decided on that particular, it was a casino or something like that.
Yeah.
In Copenhagen, or right?
I think no, actually it was Montreux, Switzerland, and
that's right.
And part of the reason they did it there too, they realized that hey, if we record out, somewhere other than England where we typically record where the band's from, we could avoid having to pay like a lot of income tax because in Switzerland I guess it was cheaper or something. So that was one reason they did it. And then like you said, where they were recording in this casino, actually, I think they were on the same bill one night with Frank Zappa. That's why also in Smoke on the Water, if you listen to the song, there's a reference to Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. That was the name of the band that Frank Zappa had at the time. And the whole thing for Smoke on the Water was written because literally, like, the place went up in flames and everybody was lucky to get out alive and everything. But that was actually the story of why that song got written, Smoke on the Water. Now, let's talk about Smoke on the Water probably one of the most iconic riffs of all time, most iconic song. And it's funny. I hear a lot of guitar players typically want to learn two riffs right away, immediately. Either "Smoke on the Water" or how to play "Stairway to Heaven" by Led Zeppelin. And a lot of rock fans and Deep Purple fans just love "Smoke on the Water." It's funny. A couple of years back, I heard Richie Blackmart, who's kind of got an interesting kind of personality, but he was saying in an interview, I know a lot of people love "Smoke on the Water." Say it's their favorite song. It's not my favorite song. It's a good song, but it's not my favorite song. And I guess you could kind of see, okay, he's the guy that wrote the song. He came up with the riff. Probably after all these years of playing that song, 500,000 times in concert, maybe you'd kind of have that feeling. But it's one of the most iconic riffs. I mean, when you hear that riff, before you even hear Ian Gillan scream the first vocal, you know the song.
Well, when you were mentioning, iconic riffs, the very, very first one was "Smoke on the Water," and then later on, "Stairway to Heaven" became that. Yeah. But then third is "Sweet Child of Mine."
Yeah.
By Slash.
Generations later, but yeah, those are the songs. I mean? Yeah,
and those three go down in history as the three iconic intro guitar riffs.
Yeah. You make a great point. That now, Gar, I got to ask you, because many people listening to this know you as a frontman for Los Angeles-based Guns N' Roses tribute band Appetite for Destruction. But a lot of people may be surprised to find out you started out as a bass player. You shared with us in some of these past shows. So when you're first getting into Deep Purple, I was curious, how much of an influence was Roger Glover's bass playing on you?
Well, huge. When I say huge, Roger wasn't the only.
No, but he was one of them.
But I just distinctly remember at times, because at that time, in the early 70s, I'm kind of between being a kid and being a teenager. You know what I mean? I'm like in that area where I had been messing around with the bass for a few years.
Yeah.
And by the time the early 70s hit, that's when I started reaching the point where I was starting to look for pieces of music that were more challenging, and the thought process in my head, when I was a kid, playing bass, was if I could learn how to do this, now I'll be good enough. You know what I mean? You always took a new piece for seeking that validation to be able to move to the next step,
of course,
which is performing in front of audiences and stuff like that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I was still in the stages of playing at home and playing by myself, but I was still playing along with the records and ruining my records at the same time.
Yeah.
But say learning how to play a song like Highway Star.
Yeah.
Or even better yet, Space Truckin'.
Yeah.
Space Truckin' on bass is pretty challenging, stuff to be to it's not your run of the mill, just
typical track.
Notes. You know what I mean? It's there's some stuff going on there, and so I remember looking at Space Truckin' as one of those songs, man, if I could get that. And I also remember when I wound up breaking that barrier and being able to do it, how excited I was that I was able to play that song from beginning to end.
Yeah, and
because it's one thing to learn how to play a riff in a song, but when you're looking for that validation, you're wanting to play it from beginning to end.
Yeah, it's interesting when we do research for these shows. You and me do it separately, and we don't really talk until the day of the show. And somehow we kind of come up with the same stuff, which is interesting. And then you have little tidbits you find that I don't find. But we're going to kind of touch upon what some of that stuff you just said. Machinehead remains Deep Purple's most commercially successful album to date. It has topped the charts in several countries. Number one in the UK, which is a big deal because the UK, that's home for Deep Purple. That's where the band is from. It was Machinehead that influenced traditional metal. Machinehead remains favorably by both fans and critics alike. Now, a thing I came across, which I didn't really think, because we're talking 50 years after this album originally came out that we're doing this, but people reviewing this album, in honor of the 50th year celebration, have made some very good points, which is like, if you kind of think about it, songs like, Space Truckin' you mentioned, Highway Star, those are kind of probably actually what you could actually consider like the introduction of maybe the first true speed or thrash metal song. I mean, Deep Purple's not what you really, and I don't think they consider themselves really a thrash metal band, but Space Truckin', Highway Star, they got kind of that heavy riffs like a lot of those speed metal songs have. And even if you look at something like Stone Cold Crazy by Queen, that's got elements of, you never think of Queen as a metal band. That's probably as metal as Queen ever got, but you know what I mean?
If you get me started on Queen, man, we're gonna wind up doing a side trip.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I considered Machinehead, at that time, in my life, I considered that hard rock heavy metal or heavy metal. I just remember hearing it for the first time, and it was. I just loved every bit of it. You could just put it on from the beginning and just play it all the way to the end, and it was awesome. But there's before we did this show that we're doing today, I listened to it again, and one of the things that stands out now, because I'm looking at it in hindsight now, is the music sounds very, very 70s. It has a very 70s element to it.
And
which is really interesting now, because way back then when I was listening to it, that wasn't ever even remotely close to any kind of thought that I had about the music, that it was going to have those type of elements that I would see later on in my life that I wasn't seeing at that time.
Well, again, Gar, we're talking about an album that's 50 years old, and 50 years after the fact, you're going to have a different, reaction to it. And I'm sure it's good. I mean, that's one of the things I love about it, the fact that it does sound kind of like stuff from the 70s. Back then, 1972, when the album first came out, I mean, it's I'm sure sounding very much like what modern rock was like at that time. I mean, 50 years later, the world's a very different place. But yet, you know what? All the songs on this album, it's one of those albums, still like a classic album, one of those albums we can point to, say, 50 years later, that's still a great album. These songs, they all still hold up. And what I love about an album like this is there's not a single filler song on this album. They're all killer. I mean, let's just go down we've mentioned some of these songs, but let's go down the list of the songs on here. Highway Star, we've talked a little bit about that. Maybe I'm a... Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Maybe I'm a Leo. Another great kind of underrated track that doesn't get a lot of airplay, but I know people love that one. Pictures of Home. That's another one of those tracks. I've heard it often enough, and I kind of forget what a great tune it is. probably one of the tunes I really dig on this album a lot is Never Before. It's one of those tunes, very underrated, I think. I don't know why it was a bigger hit. What's kind of interesting about that track I read is that's the first song they released as a song initially when the album was released, because they thought it was the most radio friendly, get the most airplay, but people were more into like, Space Truckin', Smoke on the Water, Highway Star.
That whole movement that was going on at that time, that was started by Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, and then followed by Deep Purple, started that whole movement, which created what you're saying right now.
Yeah. And back when you and I were growing up, you're a little bit older than me, but back in the 70s and even the 80s, bands used to go in the studio. I mean, they would record these albums at the time, like literally live, where all the band members would be in the same studio room. You cut everything live, and you can tell, like an album like this, you put it on, it sounds like the band was in the same room. I mean, I don't know what it is, but it's got the way they recorded stuff back then. It's got a certain kick to the album. The songs all seem like they were made to be on the same album. I mean, albums back then, not just the album cover, although that was a huge part of it, because I remember, seeing stuff like Kiss Destroyer back in the day, and man, it looked like the guys were standing on top of a world. It's like, man, I don't know what this is, but I gotta have it. That looks so cool, I gotta have it. And back in the day when they were making these albums, there's a real art to, they put the songs in a certain order, and the album cover played a role, and everything, the way they marketed these songs, to the radio.
Yep, really, Machinehead captures Deep Purple at the height of their career and their creativity. And
what's funny about that is, I was when I was posting we were going to be doing this today on our Facebook page, I made a comment. Somebody commented back that the biggest problem I have as a Deep Purple fan is I could never decide if I liked Machinehead better or Burn. Now, two great classic Deep Purple albums. Now Machinehead, it was kind of interesting because this is the final album with this lineup. Like I said, there'd been friction in the band, especially between Blackmore and Ian Gillan. And it got to the point after this album that Ian Gillan had left or was kicked out of the band. And at that point in time, the other guys in the band thought, well, okay, Gillan can be replaced, but we can't get rid of Richie. It's his band. He's one of the founding members. We need the guitar hero. They had that belief back in the day. And then at the time, Richie decided once Gillan was gone, he had nothing against Roger Glover, but he thought, well, he's Ian Gillan's friend. He's the one that brought Gillan into the band, so he's fired too. Okay? And so by the time... You're
fired by proximity.
Yeah, so by the time they do the next album, which is Burn, they get a then 21-year-old unknown David Coverdale, who nobody had ever heard of at the time. He's the guy chosen to replace Gillan, and then they get the legendary Glenn Hughes, and those two guys are a new Deep Purple, and they do the next album, Burn, and you think at that point, okay, Ian Gillan's out, Glover's out, Deep Purple's through. After they get rid of these guys after their biggest selling album. The next album, Burn, was just as popular. They went on to continue to have success for a number of years.
But just like everything, just like Guns N' Roses, when everybody you ask any hardcore Guns N' Roses fan about lineups, and everybody will say the original lineup.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with Deep Purple, even though they had an original lineup before.
This was a lineup.
But that was kind of when Deep Purple was kind of, still an embryo, so to speak. Yeah. But what most people consider the original lineup is the Machinehead lineup.
You're right about that. And, and I guess when Richie Blackmart finally left the band in the... I think it was around 1990 or something. He had a big blow up on stage with Gillan and just kind of stormed off the stage and said he was out of the band, never to return. And since then, they've gone into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they and also Coverdale and Hughes were invited, but Richie didn't show up. And there's a lot of controversy about that. But hey, hey, they're in there, and rightfully so, you know.
You know what? You know what happens is when you're in a band, and you're basically thrown in a room with 4 or 5 other people.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, it's always an experiment.
Yeah.
Because it's always how those different personalities bounce off of each other, and sometimes you have magic, and then sometimes you have implosions. And you know, Deep Purple, they had many different
lineups,
lineup changes and stuff like that. And when you're talking about like the Machinehead, lineup, that's the iconic lineup. But then, you know, most people, you know, it's kind of weird, because by the time Deep Purple wound up not having him in the band, and I think he was replaced by Steve Morse, which is a phenomenal guitarist.
Oh, yeah.
Also, the band was able to continue on and everything like that. But it's kind of weird. You can only speculate whether the band would have done better, if they continued on with Richie, or if they had not, done what they did, was moving on without him.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like Richie. It just seems. I can only speculate, because I have nothing to hang my hat on. But the impression that I get is Richie was difficult to work with.
Oh yeah, a lot of people have said that, and the thing is, I got respect for both camps, because they did, like back in 1984, they did briefly reunite, before the band fell apart again in the 90s. But the thing is, I've heard in both different interviews where, different guys in the band have said, Gillan and Blackmart, they didn't really like one another. They're at a point that, like, we're old men now, and there's not a lot of feuding going on, but we just rather, if we're going to get up on stage, have fun, be around people that like being around each other. And so, they're at an age where if we're going to be still doing this, let's do it while we're having fun,
It sure is a lot more fun to do it when you're having fun.
Yeah.
When you're in a band and you're actually contractually obligated to work with other people, and you really don't have that much of a choice, and you have to do it. It can be literal torture.
Oh yeah.
That kind of environment can become so toxic.
Yeah.
And the general public really, is never privy to any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so the general public basically makes their decisions on what little they know about these people's personal lives.
Yeah.
But they're making their decisions on what little they know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, so there's a lot of where these bands do this, and they have these, just like Guns N' Roses at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame had that same kind of drama going on. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think Axl wound up not showing up, and doing this whole drama thing too. But the public really does not understand what actually has transpired behind the scenes that could make some of these rifts so deep.
Yeah, I think like I even in regards to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing, I heard Richie at the time saying kind of like, well, it's not that we hate each other, but kind of like he felt like if he showed up, he'd be like kind of faking like he was best chaps with all these guys, and they're really not. In fact, But one guy in the band that everybody kind of seemed to agree was kind of the peacemaker, and one that everybody just really loved was John Lord, who sadly passed away a number of years ago. But I got to ask you about John Lord, because Deep Purple is one of those bands that what he did on the keyboards. He played this thing called the Hammond organ. It just gave Deep Purple such a heavy sound. Deep Purple's a band I will point to, Gar, and tell people, okay, you say keyboards suck and don't belong in rock music. You play me of those classic Deep Purple albums and listen to what John Lord did. Especially on this Machinehead album, okay? And you tell me keyboards suck.
Well, there's elements to that the keyboard that he was using.
Yeah. Through an amp, a Marshall
really
amp.
Kind of was the quintessential keyboard at that time, because they were using Leslie speakers, and there's this whole history behind that keyboard that he was using.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people don't think about is at that time when they were touring, that just the keyboard alone, not including the
guitar,
Leslie speaker, which is a separate item that gave him his sound. But the keyboard alone weighed, just tons. It was like deathly heavy, and they would literally have to move that keyboard from venue to venue.
Oh yeah.
And just
the keyboard
just dealing with that keyboard alone would make the work for that tour group so much more work.
I bet. Yeah.
And then there's another thing that during that time, the audience used to just absolutely go nuts, because when he would play his keyboards, he would literally rock the keyboards back and forth, which really took a lot of strength to do that, because the keyboard was so heavy.
Yeah.
But when he was like bouncing the keyboard back and forth, he was getting sounds out of the keyboard, that you could only get from being abusive to the keyboard like that.
Yeah.
And the audiences would go wild, and he became famous for doing that.
Yeah, but by the time Machinehead came out, they'd had that heavy keyboard sound, and he was known for that back then. I remember seeing an interview with John Lord where somebody had asked him, hey, so a lot of people would say that Deep Purple's like the Godfathers of heavy metal. He says, well, I don't know if we're the Godfathers. I at this point in time, I'd say maybe we're more like the grandfathers. But he goes, okay, I'll take that credit. And the thing.
Well, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say another thing I should point out is at that time, if you go back on you can go on YouTube and you look at all these classic Deep Purple shots, from the 70s. And they were, like I said, they're known for being a great live band. They were the ultimate jam band. You go see a Deep Purple concert back in the day, or even today, and they will jam at out one song for 30 minutes and rock your world.
Well, back in the 1970s, when I guess I'd say this is later on when I was more kind of like high school age.
Yeah.
There was somebody that was telling me that Deep Purple was in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the loudest band in the history of music.
Oh wow!
And so I didn't believe it,
but it's true.
I looked it up,
it's true.
And sure enough, they were in there at that time as the loudest band in the history of rock and roll.
In fact, I remember back in the 70s and 80s reading Circus Magazine, and whenever there'd be something about Deep Purple, they would be they would kind of have that claim, loudest band in the world, anything attached to Deep Purple. And talk about the power of Machinehead, Gar, here. Machinehead remained, get this, on the Billboard charts for over 2 years, and it peaked at number 7.
All I know is I was around at that time, and that album absolutely rocked.
Yeah.
And you see, it's hard for younger people to look at it in perspective, because they can only look at it in the fact of how they see it now, looking back.
Yeah.
But at that time, when they came out with Machine Head,
it was a statement.
It rocked so much. And it was so influential, and people just, ate that album up so much.
I mean, people got to understand this is.
That it was just, it was a phenomenon of that time.
Yeah, I mean, people got to understand.
But the only way to really know that is you'd have to have been around at that time.
And people got to understand.
People in later generations can only look back, but they really never grasp, because they look at it in the perspective comparing it to whatever exists following it.
Yeah,
but at that time, in the early 1970s, very little exists that was like it at that time, which made it so impactful.
Yeah, and people got to kind of understand, this is what I would equivalent to, like the Black Album was to Metallica, or Let It Be was to the Beatles, or that very first Van Halen record, and getting a little more deeper into Machine Head, I came across some interesting notes. Pictures of Home has 5 solos on each instrument of the band, which was not so common in 1972. And get this, many people think John Lord's organ solo on Highway Star is a guitar solo, but it's not. The song features both an organ solo and a guitar solo. So a lot of people hear his keyboard again, thinking it was actually a guitar solo was a keyboard.
John Lord, there's a reason why John Lord got that gig.
Yeah, and he's a founding member too, we should mention. But Deep Purple were also considered a progressive rock band, in the 60s, Gars, as we were saying, kind of. This predates Machine Head, but I know a lot of you were into a lot of that progressive rock with Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and stuff like that. Yes, I think you shared me. You were a fan of. And so again, early on in their career, they were considered much more of a progressive rock band, and by Machine Head, they're much more closer elements to hard rock and metal, and that's kind of what Deep Purple would go on to be known for. So Machine Head, they really made a statement with that album.
Well, my perspective is I look at Deep Purple at the time of Machine Head was the equivalent to Metallica.
Yeah.
At that time, they were the Metallica of the early 70s.
Oh, sure. And here's another interesting fact. In 1972, when Machine Head was released, bass solos were not all that common, on albums back then. But Deep Purple bassist Roger Glover played a bass solo on the song "Pictures of Home." And if you kind of if you go and listen to that song, you can kind of hear that bass riff just really kind of runs throughout that song. That's like the main riff throughout that song.
Well, my song that I used to really, really enjoy back in the day when this was all coming out was "Lazy."
Yeah.
When you listen to it now, it sounds so. It's got that 70s stamp on it. But musically, it's really very good. Yeah,
I hear a lot of people bring that song up, and I think part of the reason so many people have had a positive reaction to that song all these years later even is it's probably one of the most different tunes on the album, and that's kind of, I think, what makes it stand out.
It was, that whole side 2 of Machine Head, it's only 3 songs.
Yeah.
But think about it.
Yeah.
Smoke on the Water.
Highway Star.
Then next, Lazy.
Yeah.
And then next, Space Truckin'.
Yeah.
Those 3 songs it's just one great song after the next.
Oh, yeah. Again, that's what makes it such a great album, just every song. I mean, it's one of those albums you put on and and you don't ever hit fast forward. At least I don't. I listened to it all the way through. Oh, another great song, until it's over finally. But and then Richie Blackmart. Another thing is a lot of people don't realize that Richie was influenced kind of like by a lot of neoclassical playing, and so if you listen to the solo on Highway Star, that was actually from what I learned was his guitar pattern throughout that song was based on a Bach-like chord pattern. So he was kind of letting his neoclassical influences come out on that song.
Well, I guess you could say that he was Yngwie Malmsteen before Yngwie Malmsteen, kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, in fact,
how he was, very, influenced by classical music and wanted to bring that as an influence to his guitar playing.
Yeah, and I think he did a lot more of that once he left Deep Purple and went on to form Rainbow. If you listen to those early Rainbow albums, but yeah, and it's funny you bring up Yngwie Malmsteen because I know he was greatly influenced by Richie Blackmart, not just his playing, but kind of the way he conducts himself. And a lot of people say he's difficult to work with. He's a Richie type, and I think that's just because of the influence Richie had on him. I don't know. And it says many fans and critics consider Highway Star to be the first real speed metal song ever. And again, this is going back to 1972. So, I mean, if you stop and think about it, there weren't any thrash metal bands back then. I mean, probably the closest you could get to one, maybe, which is more of another European band, Tigers of Pang Tang. But you didn't have Metallica or Megadeth. Or any of these other metal bands back then. They didn't come until the 80s, but I don't know. Again, Deep Purple being kind of one of those early bands that kind of, set the way for the future. I mean, that very much does sound like maybe a speed metal song, Highway Star.
It sure does.
Yeah.
And listen to the guitar solo in Highway Star.
Yeah.
I mean, that is such a memorable guitar solo.
Oh yeah.
There are very few guitarists out there that do guitar solos that have the same kind of latching effect that a hook type chorus will have on a song, where a hook type chorus is that thing that's in your head that you can't get out of your head.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
All these songs have that.
Very few guitar solos have that type of effect, the same type of effect that a hook chorus will have in a song.
Yeah.
I'd say that Neil Schon from Journey used to have that unique ability with his guitar solos to make them very memorable, just as memorable as the chorus in the song. But Richie Blackmore really kind of was setting that standard with the guitar solo that he did in Highway Star, because it was just so memorable.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard James Hetfield from Metallica talk over the last several years that the song off the Black Album, Enter Sandman, that's the guitar riff that just keeps playing. He says people hear that song again. It's one of those songs that you hear the opening riff before you even hear him sing the first lyric. You know the song. You got the song in your head after hearing it half a dozen times throughout your lifetime. But that's one of those songs that the band may get tired of playing. But every time you go to see Metallica, you know they're going to play that song because that's the one the fans want to hear.
Well, by that time in your career, basically that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're there to satisfy the audience, to play the songs that they want to hear. And I have to kind of deal with, things similar to that on a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
Because, when I do shows, people will, the hardcore Guns N' Roses fan will want to hear songs that are off the beaten path.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they have a personal connection to that song, even though the song was never that, you know, huge hit for the band. You know, and so when they come and see a tribute band, that's more what they want to hear. They're
wanting the hits.
They want to hear the stuff that's off the beaten path.
Yeah.
But but what I'm actually hired to do by the venue is to play the hits.
Yeah.
You know, because they're the actual ones that are hiring me.
Yeah, to do the job.
But you know, and to be honest with you, the percentage of the audience that comes to my shows, 90% of that audience is going to want to hear the hits.
Of course, yeah.
They're going to want to hear the highway stars of the set, you know, and the smoke on the water of the set. You see what I mean? They're not going to want to hear, you know, something that, you know, that's off the beaten path.
Right.
And only 10% is going to want to hear that stuff. So what percentage of the audience am I going to cater to? I'm going to cater to the 90%, and I'm also going to cater to the people that actually hired me.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine breaking out in like Dust and Bones or 14 Years? Hey, is that a new Gar Borras original tune, or are you guys testing out your solo material, Gar?
Well, you know, sometimes, you know, because Guns N' Roses material it doesn't have this huge library like a Led Zeppelin or a Pink Floyd, you know, that's got like many albums of material to choose from. Guns N' Roses is much more limited, and sometimes I get hired to do shows where we wind up doing Dust and Bones. You know, you know, basically because we you know we really have to
cater to
fill that void.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume that probably less likely to get you guys doing like, hey, well. You know, Appetite for Destruction is going to do Chinese Democracy in its entirety. I mean, probably not too much of a demand for that.
No, but I have to say that, you know, I was really surprised when I actually heard the song Chinese Democracy.
Yeah.
Because that song I like a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, but you know, when I was going through material, trying to find material to fill the void with sets, you know, I was going. You know, once I discovered Chinese Democracy, I was going, wow, you know, this is a good song. I started listening to all the rest of the stuff on the
that
album,
album's just
and there
different.
was nothing else.
Yeah.
The Chinese Democracy was the only song that I really latched onto.
Yeah.
You know, but anyways, we're digressing. We're going down a completely different.
Yeah, and so
the star of this show is Machinehead
and Deep Purple,
Roger Glover,
Ian Gillan.
You know, I can't say enough about Roger Glover. You know, as a bass influence, because not only did he come up with some very memorable bass lines that are just as critical to the song as the guitar parts.
Oh yeah.
You know, bass players are like the unsung heroes of a band.
And we should note
because,
that
you know, bass players are, when you hear a song, rarely does a non-musician recognize the bass when they're listening to it. They just listen to the song as a whole and they go, ooh, I like that song. Ooh, I don't like that song. You see what I mean? It's just a cut and dry kind of thing. But here's the thing about a bass player. Once you take that song and you take the bass out of it, now all of a sudden the song you just took the bottom out of it.
Yeah. And you know
what I mean? And now all of a sudden that person that really doesn't know anything about music is, what did you just do?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Now they notice. You how much better that song sounds with that bass part, and how much is lost when you take that bass part out.
Yeah.
So it is, when you do that, then you realize how critical the bass is.
Yeah.
But the non-musician will never recognize that when they listen to a song on the radio. The last thing they're paying attention to is the bass player.
And I think that's no more apparent than, like, if you go and listen to any of the Doors albums. I mean, that was the thing, is the Doors didn't really have an official bass player because they kind of had that attitude of, we can just kind of bring any studio musician to fill in the bass parts. And that's kind of interesting that they were one of the only bands that not really have an official bass player. But I'm kind of wrapping this up for today. 50 years later, Machinehead remains a musical powerhouse masterpiece, but delivered a mixture of traditional hard rock with some catchy songs, and an all-star band where every single member of the band got a chance to shine. And you don't get that too often. I mean, there as much tension as there were between some of the band members, mainly like Gillan and Blackmore. Over years, in interviews, they've all had a huge, tremendous respect of what each guy could kind of do musically, and what each guy kind of brought to the table. And it's interesting, by the time Blackmore left the band, like in the 90s again, they temporarily replaced him with Joe Satriani, of all people. And Satriani just did like a little bit of what was left of the tour. And then he made the decision he wasn't going to join Deep Purple because he goes, how the hell can anybody fill those huge shoes left by Richie Blackmore? He goes, it's too much pressure for me. I just don't see myself being able to do that. And years later, like a couple of years ago in a Guitar World interview, Richie was talking about, he thinks between Joe Satriani and Steve Morse, he says Steve Morse is a much better guitar player for Deep Purple than what he thought Satriani did. Kind of interesting. Both guys brought something to the picture, but Steve Morse has lasted, he's been in Deep Purple now longer than Richie, so we should mention that.
I think Joe Satriani made the right decision.
Yeah, for him, yeah.
Because he kind of, carved out his own unique place in rock music.
Yeah.
Which really you have to give him credit because he did it as a guitar player. Yeah. Where when he released his albums, really had no element of singing as part of the draw into the popularity of what he was doing. He did it off of his guitar playing and the element of art that he brought to his guitar playing, because that I think a lot of people recognize him as a great guitar player, but what he really truly did that put his stamp on what he was doing was he brought an artistic element to his guitar playing that allowed his guitar playing to be able to carry the whole thing.
Oh yeah, and I mean, really, kind of Joe Satriani, Steve Vai. Also we should mention that Joe Satriani, he would like teach Steve Vai and Kirk Hammett from Metallica how to play guitar. He was their guitar teacher early on, and very much like you said, when Surfing with the Alien came out back in, I think it was 1986 or 87, that kind of set the standard for all those popular guitar type of albums that would come out like in the 80s. I mean, he set the standard because, like you said, guitar albums like that were not very common back at that time. He kind of was one of the first ones and really set the standard for other people kind of going on to do that. I mean, if it had not been for guys like, Joe Satriani or Steve Vai, there would not may have been those guitar type albums that we're talking about,
But then you wouldn't have the guys like Joe Satriani's and
for Deep
Steve
Purple
Vai's and the Steve Morris's of the world if you didn't have Richie Blackmore.
That's true.
Paving the road for others to follow.
I mean, I'm a huge Richie Blackmore fan. I love everything he ever did, but I got to be honest, probably Deep Purple is my favorite band but I love the Rainbow stuff with Ronnie James Dio, and quite surprisingly, a number of years ago, his publicist sent me the latest CD at the time from his band Blackmore's Night, which he does with his wife, and they sound nothing like Deep Purple or hard rock. I describe it more of a kind of a folky type band. Sounds very different from what you'd think Richie Blackmore would do, but it wasn't like my favorite cup of tea, but I thought, okay, I'll give it a fair listen, and you know what? It wasn't a bad album. It was just kind of different, but I think if more people would check that stuff out, they might be kind of surprised. You know, okay, this is a little different, but it's not bad.
I have a feeling, though, that it fills a void for Richie.
Yeah. See, and that's the thing I've heard him talk.
Playing that music, he's kind of playing to his own tune.
Yeah.
I think doing that whole folk element to what he's doing now gives him personal fulfillment.
Yeah, he's at a point in life too, and at an age where, thank God, he doesn't have to do it for the money anymore. He can just do it for the pure enjoyment, and that's got to be a great place in life to be. And 50 years later, Gar, Machinehead remains a musical powerhouse masterpiece that delivered a mixture of traditional hard rock, as I said. Machinehead was such a huge musical masterpiece for Deep Purple. Imagine the shock of Deep Purple fans when 1 year later, Ian Gillan and Roger Glover were both fired from the band and replaced by a then unknown David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. But, they look at the success everybody went on to have. And then, years later when, I discovered Whitesnake, with that 1987 album, I mean, imagine my surprise. I had no idea. Oh, the singer on Deep Purple's Burn album, David Coverdale, that's the same guy doing Whitesnake. Wow.
Well, obviously, whoever made the decision of giving him an audition for Deep Purple saw something.
And thank God they did, because, I mean, he's one of my all-time favorite singers. And I will just say this. I'm a huge Whitesnake fan. I'm a huge Deep Purple fan. I love everything Coverdale's done. But Deep Purple also had such a major impact on Coverdale, not just as a singer, but as a human being, that a couple years back, and I urge people to go online and check us out, or if you're really a Deep fan, maybe go out and purchase the album. Coverdale with Whitesnake, they released this album called the Purple Album. And it was Coverdale with his Whitesnake band at the time, redoing all of these classic Purple songs that he did with Deep Purple back in the day. And it's songs from, throughout his whole time with Deep Purple. And initially the idea was to kind of have Richie and him do an album together, but it never kind of came together, so he just made it a Whitesnake album. And that's one of my favorite Whitesnake albums from the last several years, because I thought, wow, you get this collection of tunes, great classic Deep Purple tunes, with Coverdale really kind of putting a modern twist on the songs he did. And I think if anybody's a Deep Purple fan, they'll want to check that out.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. Maybe I'll check that out.
And Gar, once again, want to wish you happy Father's Day, and thank you for doing this. This has been episode 25 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. And Gar Borras, you are the rock star of our pop culture playground, as you've dubbed it.
It might be a stretch, but wow, think about that, 25.
Yeah, I mean, and like I was saying earlier on our page, we could not do without the folks continue to support what we do. And we want to bring you guys something different each time we do this. Next time, we're going to be doing an episode 26 on Laverne and Shirley, one of our favorite classic TV shows of all time. And that's kind of was like my Tuesday night, as I've said in the past. Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Three's Company. So when we do Laverne and Shirley, we're going to do a wrap on that. But that's just to what your guys' appetite. We got so many exciting things on the way. So thanks for checking us out every 2 weeks, and we will do this again, Gar. So thanks.
All good, brother. Looking forward to doing it again.
Chaotic Risk Magazine.